This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Ticket sales for Indiana Jones have opened, and naturally, Disney and Lucasfilm were counting on positive reviews and hype from the Cannes screening to drive those ticket pre-sales. Because if there's one thing Disney needs right now, after Marvel's Quantumania lost them more than 100 million already, and with things looking bleak for the Little Mermaid, it is for Indiana Jones to be a smash hit. As it turned out, however, the Dial of Destiny bombed with the critics. Spoilers are out and the negative view is cemented. And for a movie with an Avatar-level price tag, that is as bad a lead-in as it gets. Alas, it is also the lead-in to even worse news, because between Reedy Creek, the mass firings and the collapsing share price, everything is going off the rails for Disney everywhere and all at once. How could this happen? How could everything go so wrong for the biggest entertainment company in history? We are about to find out, because their current predicament was entirely preventable and the direct result of the management, to put it bluntly, moving from creating shareholder value to bending over backwards for everyone else at shareholder expense. In this video then, we'll begin to illustrate this with a brief summary of all of the Lucasfilm-related bad news and how they still pale compared with all of Disney's other even worse news, before uncovering how stakeholder capitalism, the ugly sibling of ESG, is a big part of the reason why things are this bad. And they are indeed bad. At the moment, Disney is all out of good news. In both previous earnings calls, CEO Bob Iger himself had to admit that millions had cancelled their Disney Plus subscriptions. But if you are among them, or contemplating cancelling your own Disney Plus subscription going forward, then we urge you, please don't take to the high seas if there should be some Disney Plus exclusives you still want to see, as neither Midnight's Edge nor our sponsors condone piracy. Not only is it flat out wrong, you would be exposing yourself to endless spyware, tracking software and other malware out there on the high seas. And that's on top of all the data that could be stolen from you during all of your regular browsing and sold to third parties. Have you noticed all these spam and scam emails you're getting? Well, they got your emails from those third parties, that's how that happens. There is a fix for all of that though. To protect yourself, you need to protect your data, and a good way of doing that is through a VPN, such as the one delivered by this channel's sponsor, Surfshark. A VPN, or Virtual Private Network, is a privacy protection tool which guarantees instant online safety and encrypts all data sent via the internet, thereby protecting your data and you. But there's more. Surfshark allows you to bypass geo-blocking restrictions by changing the country you access the internet from, which gives some great advantages when it comes to streaming. For instance, you can access 15 different Netflix libraries, all with a different selection of movies and TV series, simply by changing your virtual location. Which is easy, because Surfshark has over 3,200 servers in more than 100 countries around the world. Outside of the US, Star, the international version of Hulu, comes bundled with Disney+. If you're in the US and change your location to, say, the UK, well then you just might get that too. That's pretty good, but it gets even better. If you type in the code MIDNIGHT when ordering, that triggers an exclusive offer of 3 months for free. Furthermore, Surfshark also offers a 30-day money-back guarantee, so there's no risk in trying it out. Do check out the link in the description below for further details and to order. Thanks to Surfshark for sponsoring this video, and with that, let's begin with how Disney and Kathleen Kennedy's day of celebration ended in annoyance, hurt feelings, and bruised egos. On May 18th, both Bob Iger and Kathleen Kennedy attended the Cannes premiere of Indiana Jones and the Pick of Destiny, alongside the most Disney-friendly critics in Europe, as well as the most Disney-friendly critics in America, flown in and wined and dined for the occasion. The movie, which cost almost as much as Avatar, stars Phoebe Waller-Bridge as Kathleen Kennedy's idealized British self-insert, a staple of her Lucasfilm productions. Remember, the sequel trilogy was all about reducing Luke Skywalker to a broken husk of a man and a cautionary tale, while Kathleen Kennedy's idealized British self-insert Ray Palpatine usurped his role, legacy, and even name. And by all accounts, there will be some of that in the Dial of Destiny 2, which guest stars Harrison Ford as a broken, downtrodden old man that had his happy ending from the previous movie taken from him. Kennedy and her acolytes at Lucasfilm may have thought that the critics would fawn over such a girl boss movie that sticks it to the patriarchy in the same way that did Star Wars The Last Jedi, but they didn't, as the movie evidently has deep structural issues, which does not bode well for what's going to happen when it opens to the general audience. That means Kathleen Kennedy is now 3 for 3. Lucasfilm had 3 properties of its own, Star Wars, Willow, and Indiana Jones, and Kathleen Kennedy has personally overseen the destruction of all of them. Raining on her big day some more, this was the day it was revealed to the world that her Willow series would be among the flops removed from Disney Plus for tax write-off purposes. And on top of that, her billion-dollar sequel trilogy-themed flop, Star Wars Galactic Star Cruiser, would also be shut down from September, with the Kathleen Kennedy self-insert and everything. With all of that failure to her name, one might wonder why she wasn't fired long ago already. And hold that thought, because we'll get back to it. But as bad as all of that may sound, it actually pales compared with Disney's other and much bigger woes. For Disney as a whole, all the bad news that no doubt ruined Kathleen Kennedy's big day are just the tip of the iceberg. After already having fired 7,000, Iger just announced a new round of firings both in the US and internationally, neither of which prevented the Disney share price from dipping below where it was when Chapek was ousted. And no matter what some news sites may tell you, Disney is losing badly against Florida over Reedy Creek. Also, attendance in the parks is down. Disney merchandise isn't selling like it used to, and now the Little Mermaid looks set to flop, at the very least internationally, where the box office is a bit harder to spin and fortify than in the US. What that means is that box office-wise, by the time all is said and done, Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 could end up being Disney's most successful movie this year. Not because it was all that successful, on the contrary, it will be lucky to break even, but because it might end up being the only movie this year that won't lose them a fortune. That is the state of Disney right now. They're failing across the board, with their audience jumping ship to Universal and Nintendo. There are many individual things you can point at in different areas of Disney's operations to explain why, but ultimately, they all boil down to that over the last few years, Disney has adopted a series of practices which one can argue were virtuous and well-intended, but which nonetheless resulted in Disney's core, built-in family audience losing faith and trust in the Disney brand. Which is why they aren't consuming Disney products the way they were only a few short years ago. That then begs the question, how could this happen? How could it ever get to this point? Why didn't Disney do something when they saw they were losing their audience and reverse course years ago already? Well, for that, CEO Bob Iger ultimately has no one to blame but himself, because it was on his watch that Disney moved away from shareholder primacy, which under the right set of conditions produced the optimal amount of goods and services that customers wanted and were willing to pay for. This is called shareholder capitalism, and it was aimed towards making both Disney's shareholders and customers happy. And you'll note I said all of that in the past tense, because they're not doing that anymore. Before we move on to what Disney are doing now instead of shareholder capitalism, a brief primer is needed, or a reminder of our earlier coverage at any rate. In our first video covering what happened with Bud Light and Anheuser-Busch, we introduced the concept of ESG. For huge corporations in particular, their access to the credit they need to not just stay in business, but to further expand their operations and grow as a company, is now linked to their ESG score. If they don't comply with the social and environmental requirements needed to maintain a sufficiently high score on a number of metrics, representation being an example of one, their credit line is literally on the line, which means insolvency is on the table if they don't go sufficiently woke. We used Anheuser-Busch to illustrate the point in that video, as they provided the perfect case study, but it applies equally to Disney as well. Case in point, Pixar, Marvel, Lucasfilm and even Fox were all acquired in deals that mixed stock and cash. And that cash was loaned from creditors that would come to push ESG, and the moment they did, Disney were forced in on that racket too, meaning they must now uphold and preserve their ESG score in order to remain solvent. For an entertainment company, this means that not only will they have to force diversity and representation into their hiring practices, they also have to infuse what the critical drinker has famously dubbed the message into their programming. This, then, is the true cost of Iger's expansion of the company and its brand portfolio. Disney became beholden to its creditors. And the creditors demand Disney go woke, just like all the other huge corporations you see pushing the exact same message. In our follow-up video, we detailed how ESG compliance directly leads to the hiring of ESG-trained talent like Alyssa Heinerscheid, who, if left unchecked, as was the case with Bud Light, on occasion might go forth and Heinerscheid not just one brand, but the entire parent company. Going back to Disney, what is Kathleen Kennedy, if not another Heinerscheid from before Heinerscheid was Heinerscheid? Granted, Kathy's hiring predates the ESG drive, but the message she infuses into her Lucasfilm properties is nonetheless the exact same message that the institutions issuing ESG-linked credit want entertainment companies like Disney to push anyway. This, by the way, could also be part of the reason why Kennedy is nigh on unfireable. It's not just that she's Hollywood royalty, although that's a big part of it too, but on top of that, Disney's lenders wants her exactly where she is doing what she does. There is no need to install someone like Heinerscheid when there already is a Kathleen Kennedy in place. Furthermore, it is more than likely that back when Disney's lenders begun collecting, Marvel and Pixar were encouraged to head down the same path as Kennedy's Lucasfilm, even if they were commercially successful and Lucasfilm wasn't. But Lucasfilm was pushing the message. Marvel and Pixar needed to use their platform to do better, which we now know didn't work out well for either of them in the long run. The bad news for movie-going audiences, and for Hollywood at large that wants audiences to go see their movies, is that as we saw in our previous video on why Arnold Schwarzenegger's King Conan movie will never ever happen, there are more Kathleen Kennedys and Alyssa Heinerscheids to go around. Their names and sometimes gender may vary, but every studio in Hollywood has one, and they are the ones pushing for ESG within their respective studios. Do us a favor and check out that video after finishing this one, as this platform's algorithm didn't show it to anyone. All of that established, ESG has a sibling, and the prime case study to illustrate this sibling is Disney. Let's begin with a question from one exasperated Disney shareholder, asked to Bob Iger 2 earnings calls ago. See our video from the time for the unabridged version.
Hello, Bob. I'd like to address what I view as the elephant in the room. Over the last few years, Disney has turned from a place of magic for children to an ideological company, serving LGBTQ, IA+, however many other letters you want to add to that, lobbies. Are you surprised that Disney's audience has plummeted, losing 2.4 million subscribers in the last quarter? Parents have simply had it up to here. No wonder you were laying off 7,000 employees from today, in addition to the other thousands last year. No wonder Disney's stock value dropped more than 30% over 1 year. As a Disney shareholder, I have a simple question. Would it not be beneficial for the company to ditch the LGBTQIA+ and gender ideology for good? If you are really interested in refloating Disney, please turn Disney back to the apolitical fun place that it used to be. And I bet that you'll win back both the trust of families and the stock market. Thank you.
What this shareholder asked for, probably without being aware of it, is a return to shareholder capitalism, in which Disney makes what their customers want. So the customers want to give Disney their money, which benefits Disney shareholders, so everyone wins. Let's see how Iger responded to this very sensible request.
You know that our company is celebrating its 100th year this year. And we've been telling stories for 100 years that are aimed at entertaining and inspiring families from all over the world. And we're extremely proud of the positive impact we've had on billions of people over that 100-year period of time. And for generations, the stories that we've told have touched people's hearts because they've been infused with right values. They've celebrated heroes and emphasized the value of family and friendship. They've instilled a steady faith in the belief that good triumphs over evil, that tomorrow is always brighter than today. And I think those stories have had an amazingly positive impact on the world, a world that always loves and needs great stories, and heavens, great entertainment, particularly in today's world. And we've recently gotten criticism, as you just expressed, for what some perceive to be agenda-driven content. And I'm sensitive to that, actually. Our primary mission needs to be to entertain, and then through our entertainment to continue to have a positive impact on the world. And I'm very serious about that. It should not be agenda-driven. It should be entertainment-driven. That should be the goal in all of our stories. And while I know we're just never going to please everyone all the time, we should be sensitive to the fact that parents have different levels of comfort with the content that is delivered to their children. I want parents to be able to trust the content that we're creating for their children, and we're committed to delivering age-appropriate content for family audiences while also telling stories that reflect the world around us and that foster a greater understanding, greater perspective, greater acceptance of all people.
That was quite the verbose answer from Mr. Iger there, so allow me to repeat what he said, only in more straightforward terms. Iger told this exasperated shareholder that no, Disney is not returning to shareholder capitalism because Disney has a higher calling to the world. And that, my friends, that corporate activism is stakeholder capitalism, the ugly sibling of and the ideological and theoretical justification for ESG. Any university course will tell you that what is decreed to be problematic about shareholder capitalism is that when the company is only interested in maximizing profits, there may be negative externalities outside of the company, pollution being the go-to example. The current year answer to this, then, is no longer the outdated concept of corporate social responsibility, but stakeholder capitalism, a model that is designed to better serve not just the company, but society at large. Under this model, the purpose of the company is to increase value not just for shareholders, but for all stakeholders. Who then are these stakeholders? Well, I'm glad you asked, because it's literally everyone. The shareholders are included among the stakeholders, but they're just one of many and are not necessarily deserving of any special privilege. Other stakeholders include the employees, especially employees that belong to some protected group. That's why Disney's management allowed themselves to be held hostage by their own employees who demanded the company use its financial muscle to influence Florida legislation over the Parental Rights in Education bill, which is what directly led to the Reedy Creek Development District being dissolved. Whenever you hear some huge corporation talk about their responsibility to their employees, this is why. Their employees are not just paycheck recipients, but stakeholders. Other stakeholders include the company's vendors and contractors, residents in the local community, the environment, and of course, allies everywhere. But then you might wonder, why do the shareholders put up with this, as they are the ones with money invested, and therefore the ones who ultimately pay the price for this corporate activism? Well, that would be because most shareholders are so small that they're either not aware, or if they are, they're too small to do anything about it. But what then about the really big institutional shareholders like State Street, Vanguard and BlackRock, which just so happens to be Disney's single largest shareholder? Why do they stand for this? Well, not only do they stand for it, they're the ones pushing for stakeholder capitalism and ESG compliance in the first place. Let's take a peek behind the proverbial curtain of corporate governance.
You have to force behaviors, and at BlackRock we are forcing behaviors. 54% of the incoming class are women. We added 4 more points in terms of diverse employment this year. It's just, you have to force behaviors. And if you don't force behaviors, whether it's gender or race, or just any way you want to say the composition of your team, you're going to be impacted. And that's not just not recruiting, it is development, as Ken said.
How do you force change, though? I mean, Larry, BlackRock has really been in the forefront of the ESG movement within corporate governance and a real leader. And yet change is so slow. So what is, and Ken as well, how do you force change when it is so incremental and so gradual? How do you do something more radical? Have you thought about that? Has the board of American Express thought about more radical things we could do to enhance diversity and inclusion?
Because it has to be imbued in the culture of a firm. It has to be talked about, it has to be shown. Behaviors across the entire firm in every region have to be similar. And every citizen of the firm has to understand what is acceptable behaviors and what are unacceptable behaviors.
That was Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, Disney's single largest owner. In the 2022 annual letter to the many CEOs under his thumb, and this includes Bob Iger, Larry Fink stated that stakeholder capitalism will be a powerful force in propelling the ESG agenda forward, saying, "It is through effective stakeholder capitalism that capital is efficiently allocated, companies achieve durable profitability, and value is created and sustained over the long term." Again, that was quite verbose, but that was BlackRock, in not so many words, telling all the CEOs under their control that unless they practice stakeholder capitalism and have their ESG score in order, there will be no BlackRock money for them.
If you do not have a lens towards decarbonization, you're not going to win one euro of business.
To be clear though, when I say BlackRock money, I mean your money, because their financial muscle comes from managing your pension fund. That's how they make their money. Under stakeholder capitalism then, companies are expected to take a multi-stakeholder approach, even at the expense of shareholder value, and instead go for what they deem to have a positive impact on the world.
This company has been telling stories for 100 years. And those stories have had a meaningful, positive impact on the world. And one of the reasons they've had a meaningful, positive impact is because one of the core values of our storytelling is inclusion and acceptance and tolerance. And we can't lose that. We just can't lose that. I think about Black Panther and the impact that had on the world, or a film like Coco. I mean, I could go on, and how we actually changed the world for the good. It must continue.
Note that nowhere in that rant did Iger say anything about Disney going back to making stories that Disney's core audience of families wanted. No, it was all about changing the world. Or, in more academic terms, creating value for other stakeholders than the shareholders. Combine that with ESG, and you have the recipe for how to make the biggest entertainment company in history flounder in just a couple of years. As their content is made so diverse and so inclusive, it becomes exclusionary to the vast majority of audiences.
And I'd heard, you hear whispers. Like I'd heard things like, oh, they won't let you show this at a Disney show. And I'm like, okay. So I was a little like sus when I started. But then my experience was bafflingly the opposite of what I had heard. Our leadership over there has been so welcoming to my not at all secret gay agenda. And so I feel like I felt like it was, maybe it was that way in the past, but I guess like something must have happened in the last like they're turning it around, they're going hard, and then all that like momentum that I felt, like that sense of I don't have to be afraid to like, let's have these two characters kiss, let's in the background like I was just wherever I could just basically adding queerness.
There was a very clear point where Disney's creditors began collecting, if you will, and from there it happened so slowly that no one noticed. But what Disney effectively has done is pull a Bud Light and Heinerscheid their company, and they are not the only ones. So, there you have the problem, and how Disney and so many other companies ended up in their current predicament. Is there a way out? I'm not saying there isn't, but that is a lengthy topic, best left for a follow-up video. To make sure you don't miss out on that, and for more analysis on the real implications of the behind-the-scenes corporate machinations that determine the form of your entertainment, please smash that like, help share this video, especially on Facebook, subscribe and smash that bell so you don't miss out on any updates. Now, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comments. And before you go, remember that to help protect your data and bypass quarrelsome geo-blocking restrictions, you should get Surfshark VPN. Use our code MIDNIGHT to get 3 months for free. Link is in the description.